So, who am I? Manfred Frey. I always have difficulty to say what I am. Entrepreneur, strategic advisor. So I've done lots of things in my life. I was working in research and F&A, and after that I was building the German subsidiary of an American software company in text retrieval. And after that I was working for IDC. You may know IDC. It's a company where you buy market figures. I was running Central and Eastern Europe for them. It was quite an interesting time. Then I went into mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, venture capital, and so quite interesting times, ups and downs, I have to say. And after that, I made something strange. I invested in an American company in molecular diagnostics. I did not even know what that means before, but I felt it's quite interesting. So I went to the company, we built it up, and for 10 years now, and I think we made great progress, and I'm a little small shareholder and a board member there. And then I went into another company which is in clinical trial business, which is a drug development in cancer. That's what I will tell you a little bit more about. And so that's where I stand. What I do these days is actually, well, if you see me, cut me in half. One half is a pensionist and doing nothing. The other half is advice or looking for my companies. And I'm working very closely with Matthias, you know him all, and try to help him building up the Blockchain Investor AG. And my other two hobbies are these two projects I will talk about. So actually, it's quite short. Well, I talk a little bit about the data availability problem. I talk a little bit about what federated learning as such is. I'm sure most of you know. And then I talk about these two applications, which is BCFL stands for blockchain-based federated learning, for high voltage lines, predictive maintenance, and then to improve clinical trials in oncology. The data availability problem, what is that? Before I come to that, I would say, when I talk to AI here, of course, that's a little bit, it's not really correct. What we talk is just machine learning, right? Has nothing to do with what ChatGPT is and that kind of stuff. It's machine learning. That's what I talk about. And if you talk about machine learning, then you know that you need very many data. Many data. And that's the problem, because if you want to learn from data, the more you have, the better it is. But most data in this world are somehow protected. So there's regulations. If you look on clinical trial data, if you look on patients' data, of course, not everybody can use them. So they are in silos somewhere. The other thing is there are user preferences and restrictions. So if you look in a financial application, for instance, and you've got customer data and things like that, the owners of the data, the one who run these databases, they do not want you to go to those data or even competing information. They do not want you to do that. The other thing is, well, less and less, but still a problem is data volumes. If you want to transform data to get them in a database such that you could do machine learning, could be a problem because these data volumes are very high. So here are the examples. We can skip that because I will talk about it. Now, what is federated learning? Federated learning learns from decentralized data. It doesn't learn out of a central database. It learns from decentralized data. And I'll show you how. The simplest description is to say the model comes to the data. By model, I mean a machine learning model, could be analytics, a neural network in most cases. So the model comes to the data and learns from the data rather than the data come to the model. I explained to you on this a small graph here. So in machine learning, what you usually have, you have here a centralized database, and you take all the data from where you want to learn from into that database, and you apply the model to those data, right? That's what originally the idea was. Now, if this guy says, fine, but I'm not giving away my data, then you cannot use those data here. And that happens. In the clinical example, it's very clear. So, what federated learning does, here is a model, and the model has a submodel, and the submodel is an early model, right? Could be done by artificial data. And then the submodel goes to here, learns from those data, and gets back with the parameters he learned from those data. And then he goes to the next one with the improved model. He goes with the improved model to the next one and learns from those data. And so forth and so forth. And then in the meantime, maybe those data have changed. And so you can go back and learn again from those data, right? That, in a nutshell, is federated learning. The interesting thing is, this is only 3 months old. There is a lot of literature in the meantime, but I can't find many real-world applications. So the only one here on the left side, that's something which really exists, and maybe most of you are using it. That is Apple Siri. If you have an iPhone and you talk to Siri, the Siri recognizes your voice. Just 2 years ago, it didn't work because Siri recognized every voice. If you would use my iPhone and ask something, Siri would reply to you. That's not true anymore. Only your voice is recognized. And they've done this by sending a model to your device, learn from the device, send the model back such the model gets better, right? And so then the device can say, okay, I accept only requests to Siri which are allowed in a list. And that is usually just your own. So that's a federated learning approach. Nobody knows about it, and Apple didn't talk much about it. But that's a real approach that works. All the other things like researchers trained medical diagnostics algorithm is research, is still not real world. Or this one is an interesting one because this is the one I wanted to know how it works, because this has the elements of what we do with the clinical trial. This is done by Big Pharma. They work on this for 3 years, 4 years, something like that. Still no outcome. And we do not need to talk about the other ones. So now that was federated learning. But what is blockchain-based federated learning and why? And if you look at this graph, then you see all these databases here, and you could have a model in the middle as I described it, but here is a blockchain. And when you remember, data are coming in, data will be deleted, data will change. What you do is you send the metadata of those data silos to the blockchain, and they're stored there immutably, can't be changed, right? So if you have dirty data, for instance, as one example, in it, because of whatever reason, then you know where they are, and you know how to capture them, and you could build in the next block of the chain, you can build in information that tells you, here it is, and then you change it, and the new information is in the blockchain as well. So it's a control, the blockchain functions as a control and management system to run a federated learning approach, right? And when this whole thing started, Federated was mentioned, the earliest mention was in 2017. Nobody talked about it, but in the meantime, if you look in the literature, everybody says, well, blockchain as a basis to manage federated learning is the way to go. So today, most cases that we talk about are BCFL. Now, easier from here. Let me talk about my two little projects. This is a BCFL for condition evaluation in electricity transmission. It's a project that a partner and I thought needs to be done because I was working in the energy industry and he specialized as a consultant and software company in the energy industry, and we said we should set up such a project. Let me explain to you a little bit what the background is. Do you know what the TSO is? A TSO stands for Transmission System Operator, and each country has one or two. In Switzerland, there is Swissgrid, and Swissgrid runs all the transmission of electricity in the country. Not the delivery. The delivery is done by, I think in Switzerland, there's 50 companies or so. But the transmission means the high voltage, which is over and above 110 kV, up to 380. The high poles also, they are very expensive. And that is what transmission operators are. And there are 4 in Germany, there's 1 in Switzerland, there's 1 in Austria. In Germany, I don't know what in Switzerland it is, the 4 TSOs operate 37,000 kilometers of high transmission voltage lines. And that's about 100,000 poles. And each of those poles cost 100,000, 200,000 or so euros to build them. There's a lot of money involved, a hell of a lot of money involved. And the problem for us all is nothing should happen there, because what if such a pole would fall down with a line that carries 380 kilovolts? That's extremely dangerous. So what these guys need to do is they need to do predictive maintenance to see whether there is a damage on a pole that could cause a real problem, right? So to do this, they started a couple of years ago sending drones, making photographs, creating images of those poles and of the lines, and trying to catch damages, right? Now they have a lot of data with on isolators, whatever it is, on the pole, a lot of data that show, okay, this is okay, this is how it should look when it's okay, or this is how it should look when it's when a damage there is. And then you combine even the damages. Is this a terrible damage, or is it just a little bit, or that kind of thing? And then you also need to have some data that describe this thing, because it's a big difference if you have a damage on an isolator which is 15 years old rather than a damage on an isolator which was installed last year. Because if they have a damage there, then you have to be very careful. There might be something wrong with the materials or so. All these kinds of things are happening. So they did all these photographs, all these images. Now they sit on millions of images. They try to look on the images personally, right? Unbelievable, difficult. Now, but there are a lot of such images. But if you cut them down to isolators or to parts of the construction, etc., to the various components you have, then a single operator doesn't have enough image, right? Then you have images of components which are okay, but damages, of course, and hopefully it's like that, damages, of course, are just a few. So what's the thing? Now these guys are not even competing with each other, because this is regulated business, right? You would say, they could take all the images and put them in a central database. But no, they don't want to do that because of various reasons. They don't want to do that. It's compliance, it's all this kinds of stuff. So we proposed a federated learning approach and saying, we build a system that takes our photographs, takes our images, analyzes them with a learning model. It's a neural network we use, and categorize them and label them and say this is like it is. And then we have another tool, which I'm not describing now, which is estimating the condition of this thing. But finally you have a condition estimation tool, a condition estimation matrix. That's what you have. But to get there means you need to have a federated learning approach. And now the BCF, the blockchain comes in, because you bring in learning data all the time in such a system, all the time, because you have new photographs. From last week, you had a drone flying over 5 kilometers or whatsoever, and you produce 500 images or so. Then you want to have these images being used in the learning algorithm. First, you have to want these images being interpreted, and secondly, you want to have them in the algorithm. So to control all these things, and maybe also you have these images replace old images which haven't been as good in quality, right? Then you take them out. And all these kinds of things, if you wanted to manage all these kinds of things, what's the best to do? Put the data on a blockchain, not the data, but the metadata on this, on a blockchain, and then you have a system to manage the whole thing. That is the project. The project just started. We have 4 partners. We have a Fraunhofer Institute, which is, I think, very well known in this area. And we have a consulting company. I have a university which is specialized in evaluation of Zustandsbewertung, we call it in Germany. So that is the project. We're just about to start. We're just working with the data just to analyze and evaluate what sorts of data we have and that kind of things to do. So that's this project. Now, I think that's enough. Now my clinical trial thing. No. I mentioned to you I'm involved in a company, and we founded a company a couple of years ago and we bought a clinical asset for cancer therapy. It's an asset which is I don't know whether you know a little bit about oncology. It's an antibody. So, you know, the mechanisms is, simply speaking, you have an antibody. The antibody approaches the cancer cell and kills the cancer cell by carrying a killer cell to it. That's more or less all these kinds of things. What you heard in COVID is the same thing. It's not an antibody, it's an RNA. But the mechanism is quite similar. And so we bought this thing a couple of years ago, and we wanted, and the thing went through 3 clinical phases already and then failed. So did not get approval from the regulators. About $100 million been invested at this time already. So we took it, and we were lucky because the company who developed it did not want to go ahead because of financial reasons mostly. And so we did a deal with them and said, we take it, we develop it to where it should be. And then we had a deal with these guys to say, we pay you only at the end when we are successful, and they agreed to that. We didn't have a chance to buy a clinical asset at this time. So that's what we've been doing. And in the meantime, a lot has changed. That's 6 years ago in the meantime. And a lot of things have been changing. We had to modify the antibody, which is good for us because our license fees are going a lot down. We have our own antibody in the meantime. Same properties, but different. And we also had to develop a test because the reason why they failed 6 years ago was simply there is an enzyme which grows on the surface of the cancer cell. And they found out that they knew that this enzyme exists, but they found out that, or that we found out after that, is that you need a specific expression of this enzyme on the cancer cell, a minimum expression, because if there is not enough, then the antibody can't bind. You know, if I take your hair and I bind, it's easy to bind to your hair, but there are people in it, if I take Matthias, it's not so easy to bind to his hair because it doesn't have much, right? So that's basically the mechanism, right? And so we learned that we have to change the study such that we take only patients in the study with a high expression of this. It's called CA9. So we've done that, and then we define. Then the regulators tell us you have to go back to phase 1 to restart. You cannot come in like phase 2 or phase 3. So we defined a so-called basket trial because in the meantime we know the original studies have been done on CCRCC, that is clear cell renal cell carcinoma. That's what I had, by the way. And but now we add NSCLC, that's lung cancer, colon and head and neck cancer, 4 different indications, because we know from these cancer cells that there is a high expression of CA9 on the surface. So we defined that study, and we, at this point of time, it's not finally decided, at this point of time, we plan to have 3 clinical sites to contribute to the study. In phase 2, it will be more, I'm sure. And oh, my taxi driver is calling me. He wants to drive me home. Strange. So now we have 4 indications. We have 3 clinics. That means we have 3 times 4, 12 databases. 3 times 4, 12 data silos, right? That's what our infrastructure is. And now we built our algorithm on top of this because we want to learn from the data. Apart from the study as such, we could have done the study just in a very traditional way, producing a lot of data on paper. That's how they work in clinics, by the way. And I don't know, guess how much a patient that goes through a study in a clinic in oncology costs you? 50 to 60, maybe sometimes even $70,000 for a half-year study. It's unbelievable, right? And you could do this for much less, okay, we can do this for much less money. And because you can automate, you have a blockchain where you manage the data. You can use smart contracts in the administrative process because you need to pay the contributors, the doctors, the clinic itself. You have to pay them, and it's all paid right when it's done. Huge administrative effort. You can manage this using a blockchain, using smart contracts. We don't see much of a problem, and we have 2 software providers. We don't want to program that ourselves. We have 2 providers who offer that to us, and we can only see that the final study will be much cheaper as is the practice these days. Of course, there are companies out in the world who don't like that, but so that's what we want to do. And in a second step, the federated learning comes in because, again, the same principles. These are data silos, very protected, because we have patient data, and data privacy is the top thing, and very protected. But we want to use this data because these days, data in a clinical data silo are used only one time in most cases. Only one time, then they're closed, even though they are so expensive data. And that's where we are, and we want to develop a BCFL such that those data can be used multiple times, and that's possible if the model goes to the data and learns from the data and comes back. That's where we stand. So those are the 2 projects, and my final remark here is The world is full of scattered data, of data that can together get you results, but we're not doing it. So, and in any industry, there are data silos produced. They're just sitting there. You can use the data and learn from them. And I do believe BCFL will be a disruptive method that can help us to make much better use of our data in a controlled, and that's the blockchain, in a decentralized, that's the blockchain, and in a very responsible way. That's what I believe is going to come up soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.